Aliens thought human training was just a game. She thought it meant war. The first thing they did when I stepped off the shuttle was laugh. Not a subtle laugh, not the kind you hide behind a hand or a quiet cough. It was open, full-throated, and directed entirely at me. 7 Tharan soldiers standing on the docking platform of the Eternal Meridian, and every single one of them thought I was the funniest thing they had seen all cycle. I was 5 feet 7 inches tall. I weighed 68 kilograms. I had no bioarmor fused to my skin, no chemical enhancements running through my blood, no secondary limbs folded against my back. I had a standard-issue field pack, a data pad, and the clothes on my back. I was, by every measurement they respected, nothing. I let them laugh. I had learned a long time ago that the moment people stop laughing at you is the moment they start worrying about you. I was not in any hurry to cause worry. Not yet. My name is Nora Webb. Sergeant First Class, retired, though the retirement was something of a formality. Earth does not really let people like me retire. They just change the title and ship you somewhere new. This time they shipped me here. The Tharan Collective had extended what they called a cultural exchange invitation to humanity. It was dressed in diplomatic language, words like cooperation and mutual understanding and interstellar solidarity. What it actually meant was simpler. The Tharan wanted to look at us up close. They had watched humanity expand across 14 star systems in under a century, and they were not sure what to make of it. We were small. We were soft. We had no bioenhancements, no hive-mind communication networks, no mineral-dense bones. By every physical standard they valued, we were unremarkable. And yet here we were, 14 star systems, dozens of contested colonies, a military record that made certain older civilizations go quiet at diplomatic tables when someone brought it up. They wanted to understand why. So they invited one of us to observe their grand trials, a centuries-old military assessment that determined rank, resource allocation, and in some cases the right to govern entire planets. They expected us to send a diplomat, someone measured and observant, someone who would take careful notes and go home with admiring words about Tharan civilization and its deep traditions. Instead, Admiral Grant sent me. I was not a diplomat. I had never pretended to be. I had spent 12 years in special operations, completed 3 tours on the contested moons of the Valdris Belt, and survived a 19-day siege at Outpost Carver with half rations and no resupply after the relief convoy was destroyed en route. I had trained in environments specifically designed to make human beings stop functioning. I had not stopped functioning. That was, apparently, the qualification Admiral Grant had in mind. The Tharan diplomat assigned to escort me was named Voss. He was tall, as they all were, somewhere between 7 and 8 feet, with gray-blue skin that had the texture of cooling metal and eyes that caught light in a way that might have been beautiful if you were not paying attention to the expression behind them. Voss had the look of a man who had been handed a mildly interesting puzzle and expected to be done with it before lunch. He shook my hand because he had been briefed on the custom. He did it the way someone shakes a child's hand at a formal dinner, carefully, as though he were afraid of accidentally causing damage and feeling responsible for it. "Sergeant Webb," he said. His translator collar rendered his voice into smooth, accented English. "Welcome aboard the Eternal Meridian. I trust your journey was acceptable." "It was fine," I said. "Where do we start?" He paused. I think he expected something more from me, something about the ship, how impressive it all was. The Eternal Meridian was impressive. It was 3 kilometers long, shaped like a slow crescent, and its hull plating scattered starlight into geometric patterns that served no tactical purpose at all. Someone had put resources into making a warship look like art. I had noticed all of that in the first 30 seconds. I had also noticed the guard rotation at the far end of the docking bay, the positioning of the secondary access corridors, and the fact that the soldiers near the entry doors were carrying ceremonial-grade weapons rather than combat-ready ones. Voss did not need to know what I had noticed. He gave me a tour of the ship. It lasted 2 hours. He described the Eternal Meridian's purpose as the host vessel for the grand trials, outlined the history of the assessment in broad strokes, and noted several times, in a tone that was almost careful, that the trials were considered among the most demanding military evaluations in known space. No non-Tharan has ever completed a full trial cycle, he said at one point. He said it gently, as though offering me a way to adjust my expectations before the disappointment arrived. What does a full cycle require? I asked. He listed the phases. A 72-hour endurance trial through a hostile simulated biome with reduced atmospheric pressure and extreme temperature cycling. A multi-team combat assessment across a large tactical grid. A command trial involving a full simulated planetary defense scenario. Each phase was scored. Totals determined final placement. And I can participate, I asked. Not observe, actually participate. Voss looked at me. Then he looked at the aide walking beside him. The aide said something in Tharan that the translator did not catch, but the tone was familiar enough. It was the tone of someone confirming that yes, the small creature had indeed just asked what they thought it had asked. Then Voss smiled. Of course, he said, we would find that very instructive. They placed me in the cadet track. Juveniles by Tharan standards, young soldiers between the equivalent of 16 and 20 years old, going through their first assessment cycle. It was intended as a kindness, I believe, or a joke. Those two things are not always different. My bunk was in Cadet Block 7. It was narrow but clean. The ration packs were designed for Tharan metabolic requirements, which meant they were dense with minerals and proteins that tasted like wet gravel, but the caloric content was workable. I sat on the edge of the bunk that first evening and sorted through everything I had. The other cadets watched me from the corners of their eyes. They did not speak to me directly. I was a curiosity to them, something between a mascot and a warning, a reminder that the universe contained things that were small and strange and probably harmless. One of them, younger than the rest and with a more open expression than the others had allowed themselves, sat at the far end of the row of bunks and looked at me directly. His name tag read Lyrian. You are the human, he said. It was not a question. I am, I said. You asked to participate, he said, in the trials. I did. He was quiet for a moment. The first phase begins at first light, 72 hours in the Sever biome. Atmospheric pressure will be reduced to 60% of standard. Temperature will cycle between extreme cold and extreme heat on a 4-hour rotation. Predator drones will be active from hour 12. He said it the way someone reads a warning label. Like maybe, if I understood what was coming, I might make a different decision before morning. I finished sorting my ration packs, placed them in a precise line beside my field pack, and lay down on the bunk with my fingers laced behind my head. Thanks, I said. What time does the light go out? He did not answer for a long moment. You are not afraid, he finally said. It came out less like a statement and more like something he was still turning over, trying to understand where it fit. I didn't say that, I told him. I closed my eyes. They gave me a cadet's bunk and a cadet's ration pack and thought that was the end of it. It wasn't the end of anything. It was day one. The Sever biome was not a place. It was a condition. That was the first thing I understood when the transport dropped us at the edge of it and the doors opened. There was no dramatic landscape, no mountains or rivers or anything that offered itself as scenery. It was flat, broken terrain of dark rock and shallow chemical pools, and the sky above it was a greenish yellow that suggested the atmosphere had been deliberately altered for the exercise. The air tasted metallic. The cold arrived immediately, deep and aggressive, the kind that does not start at the skin but seems to press inward from the chest. The Tharan cadets pulled their biological thermoregulation responses into gear around me. I could see the shift in their skin pigmentation. A natural response their species had developed over thousands of years of harsh environment evolution. Their bodies adjusted automatically. I had a thermal underlayer and a field jacket. That was it. Lyrian glanced at me as we stepped off the transport. I could see him calculating. He had clearly decided I would not make it past the first temperature cycle. He was being reasonable. Based on everything he knew, he was probably right. He did not have everything I knew. The first 12 hours were endurance and navigation, no objectives and no enemy contact, just cover distance, manage resources, and remain functional. The terrain was designed to waste energy. Loose rock shifted underfoot, uneven ground demanded constant attention, shallow pools disguised their depth until you had already committed your weight. The Tharan cadets moved with long, efficient strides. Their legs were built for terrain like this. They covered ground easily and they knew it. I moved differently. Shorter steps, lower center of gravity, every movement stripped of wasted effort. I had learned this pattern on the rock fields of Valdris III, where you either walked that way or you did not walk far. It was not fast and it was not impressive, but it was sustainable across 72 hours in a way that nothing showy ever is. By hour 6, 2 Tharan cadets had turned back. Their scores would reflect it, but the biome was designed with expected dropout rates. Not everyone meets average, even among the enhanced. I was still moving. By hour 10, a third cadet dropped with a muscle strain from the uneven terrain. His thermoregulation had been working hard, drawing resources away from physical performance. The temperature cycles had been brutal in the last rotation. I had not burned the same energy. My regulation was external, coming from the jacket and from deliberate behavioral choices. Keep moving in the cold phases. Find minimal cover during the heat rotations. Drink at intervals timed to exertion level, not to thirst. Thirst lies. You learn that early in the kind of training I had, or you learn it the hard way in the field and carry the lesson in your body for the rest of your life. You drink when the schedule says, not when the body panics. Lyrian was still going. He was one of the stronger cadets, quiet and disciplined, and he had been watching me with increasing frequency. Not with suspicion, exactly. More like the attention of someone who has noticed a detail that does not fit the expected pattern and cannot stop returning to it. At hour 12, the Predator drones activated. I heard them before anyone else did. They were quiet machines, as drones go, but I had spent considerable time in environments where missing a quiet sound had consequences. The faint electrical hum at the edge of perception, the slight pressure change that preceded a scanning sweep. I caught both and dropped flat behind a low ridge of rock before the first sweep completed. The cadets around me scattered. 2 were tagged in the first 90 seconds. Being tagged was not a scenario elimination, but it added a significant fatigue penalty and removed 1 gear item from your inventory. In terrain like this, slowing down had compounding effects that did not stop compounding. I stayed behind the ridge and watched the drone's pattern. Drones are always consistent. Consistent means predictable. Predictable means manageable. I mapped the gap in its sweep rotation, then moved through it in a low crawl, covering 70 meters before it completed its next pass. I was not tagged. Lyrian, coming up behind me, dropped beside me as I settled into a new position. He had read my movement and followed it. That was a good instinct. "How did you know where to move?" he asked, his voice low. "I counted the sweep interval," I said. 12 seconds, 4 seconds to cross the gap, 8-second margin. He stared at me. "You counted during the drop." "You count during the drop," I said, "or you do not know what you are working with." He was quiet, then he looked at my pack. "You have not eaten your rations on schedule." I had been eating smaller amounts more frequently, spreading intake across the hours rather than consuming standard portions at set times. He had noticed the difference in the pack weight. "I am rationing them," I said. The trial resupply comes at hour 36. That is if the resupply comes, I said. I do not plan around promises. He looked at me with the expression I was beginning to recognize from him, the one that was actively working to recategorize something. This is a controlled exercise, he said, not a combat deployment. The resupply will come. Tell me something, I said. Have you ever been in a situation where the resupply did not come? He thought about it honestly. No, he said. I have, I told him. 19 days, Outpost Carver. The relief convoy was destroyed en route and we did not know it for the first 4 days. 4 days of assuming resupply was coming. By the time we understood it was not, the margin we had was already smaller than it should have been. I paused. I do not say that to impress you. I say it because the reason I ration is not fear of this specific exercise. It is memory. My body remembers what it felt like to run short, so I do not let it run short. That is not instinct. It is a trained response. Someone taught it to me. Lyrian was quiet as another drone sweep passed overhead, and we both stayed motionless. Who taught you? He asked. A staff sergeant named Owen Blake, I said. He was not gentle about it. He made sure the lesson went somewhere it would stay. Was he a good teacher? I thought about Owen. His voice like gravel, his hands that were never still, the way he checked every single person in the unit before he ever checked himself, every time without exception. He was the best teacher I ever had, I said. He never once stood in front of a classroom. We moved again when the drone cycle opened. I led. Lyrian followed. The remaining cadets fell further behind, burning energy in patterns I had already mapped and knew were unsustainable past hour 40. Hour 24 passed, hour 30. The Tharan monitoring team was watching on a secondary assessment feed. I did not know this at the time. Lyrian told me later, after the phase ended, when he had seen the assessment logs himself. By hour 40, I was the only member of the group who had not been tagged by a drone even once. My rations were within planned margins. My body temperature was regulated, my hydration was deliberate, and my pace had not changed from the first step off the transport. Hour 72 arrived the way all endpoints do in difficult terrain, not with relief, not with a rush of emotion, with a quiet, ordinary sense of continuation, as if the body had simply noted the number and moved on. The transport came. I walked to it. I climbed in and sat down. Lyrian sat across from me. He looked tired. All the cadets looked tired in the particular way of people who have pushed harder than they expected to. I checked my hands for cold-related damage, found none, and decided I could eat a full ration portion now that the phase was complete. Lyrian watched me eat. You were not afraid at any point, he said. I was afraid at several points, I told him. Hour 18, when the temperature dropped faster than the scheduled cycle suggested. That was outside the listed parameters, and I did not know whether it was an error or an escalation. Hour 44, when the drone pattern shifted. I recounted the interval twice because I did not trust my first count. But you did not show it, he said. Fear is information, I said. You do not perform it, you use it. He thought about that for a long time. The transport hummed around us. The other cadets dozed or stared at nothing. I finished the ration pack and logged my physical status on my data pad the way I had been trained, the way Owen had shown me on a folding table in a field base with sand in every crease of his uniform. Accurate, specific, no exaggeration in either direction. He thought he had said something that should have worried me. Instead, he had given me the most important piece of information I had gathered all day. They had no idea what a human looked like when she was getting ready. The second phase started before the soreness from the first had fully settled. That was fine. I had trained sore. Soreness is the body cataloging what it went through. It means the body is still working, still accounting for itself. You can accomplish a great deal while sore. The combat assessment was a different kind of test. The biome had measured persistence. This measured thinking. Specifically, the ability to make decisions under pressure with incomplete information against opposition that was actively and intelligently working to stop you. The tactical grid was 40 kilometers across. Mixed terrain, open ground, elevated ridges, forested simulation zones, and a cluster of constructed structures near the center representing an objective hub. 2 teams would operate simultaneously, competing for objective captures and eliminations. Scores were assigned on both metrics. My team had been assembled by the trial administrators, 8 Tharan cadets from the endurance phase, plus me. The opposing force was a unit of upper-tier veterans with full trial experience, assigned specifically to this match as the dominant side. The gap in proven capability was deliberate. It was meant to give the cadets a difficult but educational experience. It was not designed to be winnable. Nobody said that to me directly, but I had spent enough years in military structures to read the architecture of a losing scenario. The cadets on my team were not pleased with the arrangement. The endurance phase had reshuffled assignments, and they had ended up alongside a human who was, by every measurement available to them, a liability. They were courteous about it. The Tharan have a particular formal politeness they apply when they are trying not to say something directly, but the message was clear enough. Lyrian was on the team. He was not polite in the same way the others were. He was simply quiet about things, which I found I appreciated more. The match began. For the first 10 minutes I did not say a word. I watched. You cannot make useful decisions about a situation you have not observed first. The cadets moved in their standard formation, tight, hierarchical chain of command, rigid positions pre-assigned. It was efficient. It was also completely predictable. The veteran unit had trained against this formation for years. They would know every move before it happened. At the 11-minute mark, the first contact occurred. The veteran unit hit the left flank hard and fast, and the cadets responded by contracting inward, which was the correct response according to their doctrine, but which also surrendered a positional advantage on the central approach path. 2 cadets were eliminated in 30 seconds. I crouched behind a rock formation on the high ground and processed what I was seeing. Their doctrine was the problem. It was not bad doctrine on its own terms. It was well designed for matched force engagements where both sides operated on the same tactical logic, but it was transparent. The veterans could read every movement before it completed because they had been reading it for years. There was no element they had not already planned against. I needed something they had never read. I moved to Lyrian. "Tell them to stop contracting," I said quietly. "Left flank holds its ground. Right flank pushes forward and goes wide, outside the veteran unit's expected engagement boundary." He frowned. "That splits our force. Standard doctrine says a split force under pressure." "I know what it says," I told him. "The problem is they know it too. We are not going to win by being correct. We are going to win by being unexpected." He looked at me for a moment. Then he relayed it without further argument. The cadets hesitated. Splitting forces was not in the pattern they had trained, but the cadet unit leader on the right flank, a composed young soldier named Fenn, made the call quickly and moved. That was the first sign I had that this team was better than they knew. The veteran unit adjusted. They had seen split force tactics before, and they began to redirect to cover the new right flank push, which was precisely what I had needed them to do. Because while they redirected, I was already moving through the center, not toward the objective hub, toward the veteran unit's communication relay node, a small signal post they had established on a low ridge 200 meters inside their operating zone. They had posted no guard on it. Why would they? No cadet unit had ever reached that position in a standard trial match. The scenario's history made the guard unnecessary, and in military operations, assumptions built from history are the easiest ones to use against someone. I reached the relay node in 4 minutes, moving low and quiet through terrain that no one was watching. I did not disable it. Disabling it would have told them immediately that something had gone wrong. Instead, I accessed the node through a signal protocol that Lyrian had explained to me during a rest period in the endurance phase while he was discussing other things, and this detail had seemed incidental to the conversation. I introduced a 3-second delay into all communications passing through it. 3 seconds does not sound like much. In a fast tactical engagement, 3 seconds between an order and its receipt means the response arrives after the moment has already passed. Not every time, but enough times in enough key moments to change outcomes. I was back in my unit's zone before anyone noticed the change. The rest of the match felt different after that. The veteran unit began to experience small disconnects, responses that landed slightly too late, coordination that was just slightly out of step with the situation on the ground. They were professionals and they adapted, but adaptation takes time, and every second spent adapting was a second my cadets were pressing objectives they had no business reaching. Fenn's right flank push reached the outer edge of the objective hub. The left flank, holding its ground, had pinned 2 veteran units in a static engagement. The center was open for exactly 40 seconds. I told Lyrian, he told Fenn. Fenn took the primary objective. The match ended. The score register took several minutes to confirm the result. Then the administrators confirmed it a second time. Voss was waiting in the staging area when we returned. He was not laughing. His expression had taken on a careful, assembled quality, the look of someone managing their reaction because they had not yet finished deciding what the reaction should be. "Your tactics were not standard," he said. "No," I agreed. "You accessed the veteran unit's communication relay." "Yes." "That is not a listed action within the trial parameters." I looked at him. "Is it a prohibited action?" He paused, a long pause. "It is not listed as prohibited," he said, "because it has not previously occurred." "Then it was within parameters," I said. He looked at me for a long time. "You will be moved to the senior track for the final phase," he said. I nodded. I did not celebrate. Celebration belongs to afterward, and afterward had not come yet. Lyrian caught up with me as I walked back toward the rest area. "The administrators have been reviewing the match footage for the last hour," he said quietly. "I have never seen them review footage this carefully." "What are they looking for?" I asked. He thought about it. "I believe they are looking for the rule they forgot to write," he said. I kept walking. Voss looked at me differently after that. Not with respect, not yet. But the laughter was gone, and honestly, I preferred the silence. They moved me to the senior quarter block for the command phase. The bunks were longer, the light was better, and the ration packs tasted like something that might once have been food. But the soldiers there were different in a way that had nothing to do with the accommodations. These were veterans, full-cycle Tharan with multiple grand trials behind them, careers built on doctrine and physical capability I would never share. They did not laugh when they looked at me. They did something that was, in its own way, harder to navigate. They watched, not with curiosity, with the measured, calculating attention of experienced soldiers who have been told that something unexpected has entered their environment and have not yet finished assessing it. I was not troubled by it. I had been in rooms full of people who had decided I did not belong there. The question was never whether they thought it. The question was what they chose to do about it. The answer came on the second day. The command trial was a full-scale planetary defense scenario, a simulated colony on a resource-rich moon, under assault from an overwhelming external force. The defending side needed to manage resources, coordinate units across multiple engagement zones, hold critical infrastructure points, and prevent simulated population loss beyond acceptable thresholds. The trial was designed to last approximately 22 hours. The defending commander would be selected by trial administration from among the participants. Given that I was the only non-Tharan on the senior track, and that my placement there had generated considerable internal debate, I had not expected selection. They selected a veteran named Doran. He was experienced and well-respected, and he ran the defense with confident authority for the first 4 hours. Then the problem arrived. I noticed it 40 minutes before it caused the damage. Doran had organized unit assignments in tiers, with position data distributed through a central relay. I had been watching the relay traffic without being asked to, because watching communication patterns had become something I did automatically in any tactical environment I was placed in. The data reaching Sector 4 was wrong, not dramatically wrong, slightly wrong. Position offsets of approximately 200 meters on one unit assignment, small enough that a commander managing the larger picture might not catch it on a scan. I caught it because I had been checking everything, not because checking was my assigned role, because checking things is what you do when you are operating in an environment you do not fully control. There is no such thing as a detail that is too small to verify when the stakes are real. I flagged it to Doran. He heard me. I am certain he heard me because he turned his head, but he did not adjust the assignment. He was in the middle of a broader coordination decision, and the flag did not register as sufficiently urgent to interrupt. Sector 4's unit moved on the incorrect coordinates. 40 seconds later, they entered the highest density simulation fire zone in the entire scenario. The system logged them as eliminated. The scenario continued. Without Sector 4, the eastern flank of the defense collapsed progressively over the next 2 hours, and the scenario reached its failure threshold with 11 hours still remaining on the clock. Doran stood in the debrief with the look of a man who had done his best in a difficult situation. He had done his best. The position corruption had been subtle. The scenario had been designed to be hard, and there were a dozen contributing factors. But 11 hours early was a significant failure margin. That night I did what I always do after a loss. I wrote it down. Not my feelings about it, not a catalog of who had done what wrong. A proper after-action report, the kind Owen had taught me to write on a folding table in a field base with sand pressing into every fold of my uniform. You write what happened. You write what the objective was. You identify the gap between outcome and objective, and you are specific about where the gap opened. You timestamp the flag. You note that the flag was raised and not acted upon. You note the result. You do not write it to blame anyone. You write it so the next person who faces this situation has information they did not previously have, and the gap becomes smaller, and someone comes home who would not have otherwise. I finished the report near midnight, 3 pages, single-spaced on my data pad. I stared at it for a while. Then I forwarded it directly to Commander Zethak. Not to Voss, not to the trial administration, to the senior military commander of the entire Tharan contingent aboard the ship. I had found his contact information in the ship's personnel directory, which was accessible to all exchange personnel. I did not know if he would read it. I sent it because that was the correct place for the information to go. Then I went to sleep. In the morning I was summoned. Zethak's office was at the top of the Eternal Meridian's command spine. A large, deliberately sparse room with a wide observation panel looking out into open space. He was standing at the panel when I entered, and he turned slowly, and his expression was the kind that requires significant effort to hold calm. He had my report open on his data pad. "You wrote this last night," he said. "Yes," I said. "After the scenario failure." "Yes." He looked at the report, then at me. "I have been a military commander for 31 years," he said. "I have overseen 412 grand trial cycles. In all of that time, no participant has submitted a written analysis of a scenario failure to my office." I did not respond. He was not finished. They do not write them, he continued, because in Tharan tradition, loss is addressed through the next performance. You do not document failure because to document it is to treat it as permanent rather than temporary. You move forward. I understand that approach, I said carefully. And yet you chose a different one. Yes. He looked at the data pad again. You have identified the position corruption. You have timestamped the flag you raised to Doran. You note that the flag was not acted upon during a high-complexity coordination moment. He paused. You have also noted that a structural change to the relay verification process would reduce the likelihood of recurrence regardless of individual commander attention level. You are not assigning blame to Doran. You are identifying the system flaw that made individual oversight failure too easy. The loss was not Doran's fault, I said. The architecture created the condition. The report addresses the architecture. Zethak was quiet. He set the data pad on the desk with a deliberate movement. Why did you forward this to me? Because you are the person with the authority to act on it, I said. Information is only as useful as the distance between where it sits and where the decision-making is. I closed the distance. He studied me for a long moment. Then he said, "There is something else in this report I need to address." He picked up the data pad again. Near the end of the report, I had noted that a senior veteran named Koraz had been observed accessing the communication relay in the 20 minutes before the position corruption appeared. I had not made an accusation. I had listed the observation, timestamped it, and marked it as a point requiring review. It was data. It was nothing but data. Zethak summoned Koraz. I waited in a side room for 30 minutes. When Zethak returned alone, something in his expression had changed. Not quite guilt, but the near relative of it. The look of someone who has discovered that a system they trusted has been carrying a gap inside it, and that the gap has been operating unseen for an unknown length of time. Koraz confirmed the interference, Zethak said. He treated it as a valid tactical decision, disrupting a competitor to improve his own unit's standing. He paused. It is not currently prohibited in our trial parameters. It has not been prohibited because it has not previously been reported. I looked at him. How many trial cycles do you believe this has occurred in without being reported? He did not answer, but the question had arrived somewhere it would stay. You prepared for accountability, he said finally, each word chosen slowly, as though he were translating from one framework into another, even when you expected no one to listen. I did not prepare for accountability, I said. I wrote the report. That is the job. It has always been the job. He looked at me for a long moment. Then you will command the final scenario. I did not ask for command. I reported a failure with evidence the way I was trained. The Tharan thought that was extraordinary. I thought it was just Tuesday. The final scenario briefing took place in a room built for 40 people and filled beyond that. Not all of them were participants. Senior officers, trial administrators, and people who had heard that something was happening and had decided they needed to see it directly. Voss stood near the back with the expression of someone who had come to watch an outcome they could not fully explain but could not stay away from either. I stood at the front of the room and let them look at me for 5 seconds. Then I pulled up the scenario map. The setup was a simulated colony on a resource-rich moon. 17 critical infrastructure points distributed across a 200-kilometer operational zone. The attacking force would be computer-controlled, calibrated to veteran-level response speed, fast, coordinated, and designed to locate the weakest point in any static defense and concentrate against it until it gave way. My defending force was 240 Tharan soldiers. The scenario designers had given me the numerically weaker hand. The intent was to maximize difficulty, in the same way the grand trials had been structured to challenge even the strongest participants across every phase. I had been given command and a problem. That was familiar ground. I spent the night before the scenario doing something none of them anticipated. I met with every soldier, all 240, not in a group briefing, not through the chain of command. I walked through the billeting areas, sat down across from people one at a time, and had individual conversations. Some lasted 5 minutes, some lasted 15. I asked every person 3 questions. What are you best at? What do you find difficult? And what do you believe is going to happen tomorrow? Most of them had never been asked any of these questions, not once. The Tharan military command structure was clean and efficient and deeply vertical. Orders moved downward. Information moved upward only when requested. You were assigned a role and you executed it, and the expectation was that the person above you had already accounted for everything the person below needed to know. It worked. It produced capable, disciplined soldiers who executed assigned tasks with precision and reliability. What it did not produce was soldiers who made independent decisions, not in the 4-second gap between when a situation changes and when the next order arrives. In those gaps, Tharan soldiers waited. They had been trained that waiting was correct, that acting without a direct order was a failure of discipline, regardless of the circumstances. In every engagement I had observed across the 3 phases, those gaps had been the hidden margin. Not the skill difference, not the physical capability difference, not the equipment. The gaps between the situation changing and the response arriving. Those gaps were where outcomes were decided. On the morning of the scenario, I gathered everyone together for a final briefing. I gave them their unit assignments and their objective zones. Then, before the assignments, I said something. You are going to face moments today where your specific order has not arrived yet, I said. The situation will have changed and the last instruction you received will no longer fit it. You will be waiting for updated guidance. I am telling you now in advance, in those moments, do not wait. You know the objective. You understand why it matters. You have the information in front of you. Make the decision that moves us toward the objective. If the decision is wrong, we learn from it and we document it accurately. But if you wait for an order that has not come yet, the moment passes, and moments in this kind of scenario do not return. The room was completely still. I do not need you to follow orders, I said. I need you to understand the objective. A veteran near the front, a soldier named Preet, who had been the most visibly skeptical of my selection as commander, raised his hand. If we act without orders and the action fails, he said, the accountability falls to the individual soldier. That is a significant risk to carry. Yes, I said, but here is what I know from experience. The worst outcomes I have seen across my career were not caused by soldiers who acted on their own judgment. They were caused by soldiers who saw something that needed doing, waited for someone else to authorize it, and watched the moment close. Independent judgment is not recklessness. It is the willingness to be accountable for what you see clearly. Preet considered that. You will support that accountability, he said, if an independent decision leads to a bad outcome. I will document it accurately, I said. If the decision was sound and the outcome was bad because of circumstances beyond the decision, that is different from an unsound decision with a bad outcome. I will make that distinction in writing, with your name on the correct side of it. Something shifted in him, not dramatic, not visible in any obvious way, but the particular quality of his attention changed. He sat back differently. I saw the same shift, to varying degrees, in the room around him. The scenario began at 600. The first 40 minutes were precisely as hard as they were designed to be. The attacking force hit 3 infrastructure points simultaneously, the standard opening sequence in any overwhelming force scenario, designed to force a defending triage response and reveal the commander's priority logic. I had prepared for it. My units were already prepositioned for simultaneous multi-point pressure, with each individual unit commander holding 2 decision options. a primary response, and a contingency, with the instruction to select based on their assessment of the ground situation rather than waiting for my confirmation from the command post. The results were not perfect. 2 units chose contingency options I would have made differently, but they made those choices in 4 seconds. Active resistance reached those points in 4 seconds. I had checked the communication latency in our relay system the previous evening. The delay between a ground observation reaching my command post and a new order returning to a unit was 14 seconds under standard protocol. In a fast tactical engagement, 10 seconds is the difference between holding a position and losing it. By hour 2, the attacking force's coordination algorithm had identified our weakest infrastructure point and was concentrating against it. Expected. I had prepared for it the same way I had prepared for drone patterns in the biome, by counting, by mapping, by projecting 3 moves past the current moment. The weak point was an intentional exposure. The infrastructure it protected was real but recoverable within the scenario parameters. The purpose of the exposure was to attract concentrated force. Concentrated force in one location creates gaps in every other location. I had kept Fen in reserve since the beginning of the scenario, out of every early engagement, specifically for this moment. When the attacking concentration peaked at the exposed point, I released Fen's unit into the gap the concentration had left on the northern approach. He moved without waiting for additional instruction. He understood the objective. He had understood it since the morning briefing. He reached 3 infrastructure points in 11 minutes. The attacking algorithm recalculated. The process took 7 minutes of positional adjustment. In those 7 minutes, I moved 2 units along the eastern corridor, sealed a southern access route, and consolidated the defense perimeter around the 9 highest-value infrastructure points. When the attacking force completed its recalculation and resumed pressure, it was pressing against a fundamentally different defensive arrangement than the one it had mapped in the first hour. Scenarios, like strategies, do not survive contact with a force that is thinking independently and continuously. The observation bay above the scenario floor had been filling since hour 1. I did not see it directly. I was committed to the map, the relay, and the constant flow of position updates. Lyrian told me afterward that standing room was gone by hour 2, and soldiers were watching through the corridor windows by hour 3. Hour 4 arrived. The attacking force had not breached any of the 9 highest-value infrastructure points. Population loss thresholds were within acceptable margins. Resource expenditure was below the scenario's projected minimum. The scenario system registered a defending side success. The room was quiet in a way that felt different from ordinary silence. It felt like the inside of a moment that had not yet finished deciding what it was. I set my data pad down and looked at the frozen map for a long time. Then I turned around. Voss was standing at the front of the observation section, and the expression on his face was the first fully honest expression I had seen from him since the docking bay. Not managed, not performing diplomatic composure, just a person who had seen something he had not expected and was still working on where to put it. "How did you know they would make independent decisions?" he asked. His voice was quieter than I had heard it. "I did not know for certain," I said, "but I told them why it mattered. When people understand why something matters, they make better decisions than when they only know what they are supposed to do. That has been true of humans since the first conflict we ever recorded. The reason someone fights is what makes them capable of thinking when the situation changes. Doctrine tells you what to do when things go as planned. Understanding why tells you what to do when they do not." Zethak came down from the observation level. He walked to the center of the scenario floor and stood in front of me, and there was something different in the way he carried himself compared to our first meeting. Less assessment, more direct. "This trial took 4 hours, he said. "The standard completion time is 22. The standard completion time assumes a specific tactical logic from the defending side, I said. I used a different one. Yes, he said. I understand that now. He paused. I reviewed the last 15 grand trial cycles this morning. In every cycle, the defending command in the final scenario averaged 4 communication-related decision delays per hour. In your scenario, I counted 1 delay. In the first 20 minutes before your units recalibrated. They recalibrated quickly, I said. They recalibrated because you told them they were permitted to, he said. You gave them accountability and you gave them the reason. And that combination produced something our doctrine has never produced in 4 centuries of grand trials. He let that sit for a moment. I want to request a formal military doctrine exchange, he said. Not as part of the cultural exchange program, as a separate military priority. I want to understand how humans develop soldiers who think from first principles, and I want to build a structured program for it. That decision belongs to people above my rank, I said. I know, he said. I am addressing the request to you because you are the one who demonstrated the need for it. He paused. Your civilization has been in space for less than 100 years. You carry no biological enhancements. You have no multi-generational interstellar military tradition. By every measure this collective has used to evaluate military potential for 4 centuries, you should not have been a factor in these trials. He said it without weight, as a plain observation. And yet you identified tactical solutions our veterans had not considered, submitted an accountability document that has already prompted us to restructure our relay verification protocol, and commanded a 240-person force to success against a scenario designed for failure in under 1/5 of the expected time. He looked at me steadily. That does not happen without a reason. I want to understand the reason. It is not a single reason, I said. It is a culture. It took a long time to build and we made very large mistakes along the way, and every mistake was written down and put into the next training cycle. We build soldiers who can think because a soldier who can only follow is a soldier who stops working the moment the situation changes. And the situation always changes. That is the only guarantee in any conflict. I paused. The culture is not about making things easier, I said. It is about making sure the next person has what the last person learned. Every failure that gets documented, every after-action report that goes to the right desk, every soldier who understands the objective instead of just the order, that is the accumulated weight of every person who came before them. Owen Blake taught me to write things down. Someone taught him. That chain goes back a long time, and every link in it kept someone alive who would not otherwise have been. Zethak nodded slowly. He turned toward the observation-level stairs, then stopped at the base of them. The grand trials maintain a formal record, he said. Every commander who has led the final scenario has their name and completion time inscribed permanently. You will be in that record, Sergeant Webb. He went up the stairs. The room gradually emptied around me. Lyrian was the last to approach. He crossed the quiet scenario floor and stood in front of me with the expression I had first seen in the cadet bunk on the night before the biome, the one that was actively recalibrating. I watched all 3 phases, he said. I took notes throughout. Good habit, I told him. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask. He was quiet for a moment, choosing the words carefully. When you arrived on this ship, he said, they laughed at you, everyone at the dock. I was there, I watched it. You did not react. No. Why not? I thought about the docking bay, the open laughter, Voss's careful handshake, the cadet bunk and the mineral-tasting ration packs. I thought about Owen, who had stood in rooms worse than that and come out the other side carrying information that kept people alive. Because reacting to what they expected, I said, would have been the most expensive thing I could do in that moment. They expected offense or uncertainty, some immediate need to prove myself. Any of those responses would have confirmed that their opinion had weight, and their opinion had not earned weight yet. Opinions earn weight through what a person does, not through who they are or how they look or how big they stand. And now, he said, has it earned weight? I thought about Zethak and his carefully honest words, about Preet, who had asked the accountability question and then sat back differently, about Fenn, who had taken 3 infrastructure points in 11 minutes because he understood the objective and trusted himself to act on that understanding without waiting for permission. Some of it has, I said. The part that did the work earned it. Lyrian nodded. He looked at his notes, then back at me. I am going to request transfer to the Doctrine Exchange Program when Commander Zethak establishes it, he said. That is a sound decision, I told him. I want to understand what you understand, he said, about why you write things down, about how you build soldiers who think, about what it means to give someone the reason instead of only the order. It takes time, I said, and it comes mostly from failure. The understanding does not arrive complete. It builds one documented mistake at a time. He looked at me one final time with that recalibrating expression. Then he nodded once, turned and walked out through the far door. I stood alone in the scenario room. The map was still displayed, frozen at the moment the system had registered success. 240 position markers holding across a 200-kilometer zone, 9 infrastructure points intact and green. A large attacking force arrested at the edges of a perimeter it had never broken through. I opened my data pad and started writing the after-action report, not because anyone had asked, not because a form required it, because that is the job. You document what happened. You note what worked and you note what would have worked better. You put the information somewhere that the next person can reach it, whether the next person is a human sergeant on a contested moon or a Tharan soldier who has never been asked to think for himself before today. The information belongs to whoever needs it. That is the only rule that matters. I finished the report 3 hours later and forwarded a copy to Zethak's office and a copy to Admiral Grant on Earth, with a short note attached. It said, "We have things they need to learn, and they have things that are worth understanding. Full exchange recommended at the earliest opportunity." Grant's reply came 14 hours later, which accounted for the transmission delay across the distance. It said approved, and then well done, and then I knew it had to be you. I set the data pad on the bunk beside me and looked out the observation window at the stars. The same stars you can see from Earth if you know where to look, distant and cold, and entirely indifferent to the things that happen in the dark between them. I had spent a long time looking at those stars with an appetite that did not have a clean name. Not ambition exactly, not pride. More like the awareness that there was a very large amount of space out there, and something in it that needed to be met on honest terms. I had met some of it today. I thought about what I would tell people when I returned home. I was going to tell them we had made deep contact with a warrior civilization that had spent 4 centuries building soldiers who could execute, and had forgotten to build soldiers who could think. I was going to tell them that physical capability without accountability is a structure waiting to fail from the inside. I was going to tell them that the most powerful thing any military culture can do is ensure that every person within it understands not just what they are supposed to do, but why it matters, and what to do when the instruction has not arrived yet. I was going to tell them that the galaxy is full of formidable things, faster things, larger things, older things with weapons that can reshape geography and cultures that stretch back 10,000 years or more. And none of that is a reason to be afraid. Because the galaxy rewards the ones who pay attention, the ones who write it down, the ones who tell the next person, the ones who build soldiers not just trained to follow orders but capable of understanding why the objective matters, and trusted to act on that understanding in the moment when it counts. We had been doing that for a long time, longer than most civilizations in this part of space, had been watching us closely enough to notice. They thought our training was a game. I thought it meant war. Turns out it meant something far more dangerous. It meant we were right.